What's up, guys? Welcome back to Horror Stories. In today's video, you'll hear some truly terrifying real-life encounters. Stories that real people have actually experienced and lived to tell. So make sure you stick around till the end, because every single story here is absolutely worth listening to. Before we begin, please hit that subscribe button and drop a like on the video. It really helps the channel grow, and I appreciate it more than you know. And let me know in the comments where you're watching from and what time it is. My name is Kyle, and I've been fishing the lakes and rivers around Spokane, Washington for most of my adult life. There's something therapeutic about it, you know? Just you, the water, and whatever might be lurking below the surface. My buddy Connor and I used to go out at least once a week, sometimes more if our schedules allowed it. We were both pretty serious about it, always looking for new spots to try, new techniques to master. We prided ourselves on being the kind of fishermen who weren't afraid to go where others wouldn't, hiking deep into the wilderness to find those hidden gems that nobody else knew about. This story takes place last September at a lake called Mirror Lake, about an hour's drive northeast of the city. It's not the most remote spot we'd ever fished, but it's definitely secluded enough that you won't run into crowds. The lake is surrounded by old-growth forest, mostly pine and fir trees that tower over the water like silent sentinels. There's a small gravel parking area at the trailhead, and from there it's about a 30-minute hike down to the shore. The trail isn't well maintained, which probably explains why the lake doesn't see much traffic despite being relatively accessible. Connor and I had been planning this trip for about 2 weeks. We'd heard from another fisherman that Mirror Lake had a healthy population of rainbow trout and some surprisingly large bass. The guy who told us about it said the fishing was incredible, but he also mentioned something strange. He said that in all the times he'd been there, he'd never seen another person at the lake, not once. He called it his private fishing hole, and seemed almost reluctant to share the information with us. But after we bought him a few beers, he eventually gave us directions and some tips about the best spots to fish. We arrived at the trailhead around 3 p.m. on a Saturday afternoon. The plan was to hike in, set up camp near the shore, fish through the evening and into the night, then pack up and leave Sunday morning. Night fishing was something Connor and I both enjoyed, especially during the fall when the air gets crisp and the fish tend to be more active after dark. We had all our gear: 2 tents, sleeping bags, a cooler with food and drinks, our fishing equipment, and headlamps for when the sun went down. The hike to the lake was uneventful, just a steady downward slope through dense forest. We could hear birds calling to each other in the canopy above, and occasionally we'd spot a squirrel or chipmunk darting across the trail. When we finally emerged from the trees and got our first look at Mirror Lake, I understood immediately how it had gotten its name. The water was absolutely still, reflecting the surrounding forest and the sky above like a perfect mirror. It was beautiful in an almost unsettling way, too perfect, too quiet. We found a good spot to set up camp about 20 yards back from the shore, a flat area with enough room for both tents and a small fire pit that someone had used before us. While Connor started setting up the tents, I walked down to the water's edge to scope out the best fishing spots. The lake was bigger than I'd expected, maybe 300 yards across at its widest point. The water was incredibly clear, and I could see straight down to the rocky bottom in the shallower areas near shore. As I was standing there, I noticed something odd. There were no fish visible in the shallows, no minnows darting around, no signs of life at all, really. That struck me as strange for a lake that was supposedly so well stocked. I mentioned it to Connor when I got back to camp, but he just shrugged it off, saying the fish were probably in deeper water. We finished setting up, got a small fire going, and made some dinner as the sun started to set. By 7 p.m., we had our fishing rods ready and were positioned at the water's edge, casting our lines out into the darkening lake. Connor was using a spinner bait while I had on a rubber worm rig, both proven techniques for catching bass in low-light conditions. The first hour of fishing was completely dead. Not a single bite, not even a nibble. That wasn't too unusual. Sometimes fish just aren't in a feeding mood. But combined with the lack of visible fish earlier, it was starting to seem like maybe this lake wasn't as well stocked as we'd been told. Connor suggested we try different lures, so we both switched things up. He went to a crankbait, and I put on a topwater popper. Another hour passed with the same result. Nothing. It was around 9 p.m. when things started to get weird. We'd been sitting in silence for a while, both of us focused on our lines, when I felt something bump against my leg. We were sitting on these flat rocks right at the water's edge, with our feet just inches from the lake, and something had definitely touched my leg below the knee. I jerked my leg back instinctively and looked down, but the water was too dark to see anything. I asked Connor if he'd felt that, and he gave me a confused look, saying he hadn't felt anything. I tried to brush it off, figuring it was probably just a piece of driftwood floating by or maybe a fish swimming close to shore. But then it happened again, this time more forcefully. Something bumped into my leg, hard enough that I actually felt pressure, like something was pushing against it. I pulled both my legs up onto the rock and shined my headlamp down into the water. The beam illuminated the area where my feet had been, but there was nothing there. Just dark water and rocks. Connor asked what was wrong, and I explained what I'd felt. He laughed it off, saying I was probably just spooked by the darkness and the quiet. Maybe he was right. We'd been sitting in near total silence for 2 hours, the only sounds being the occasional pop and crackle from our fire back at camp and the gentle lapping of water against the shore. It was the kind of quiet that can play tricks on your mind, make you notice things that aren't really there. I put my feet back down, closer to the rock this time and further from the water, and we continued fishing. Another 30 minutes passed without incident. I was starting to think Connor was right, that I'd just been imagining things, when my rod suddenly bent forward with tremendous force. The tip was pulled down almost to the water's surface, and my reel started screaming as line peeled off at an incredible rate. I grabbed the rod with both hands and tried to set the hook, pulling back hard, but whatever was on the other end was strong, really strong. Connor jumped up and shined his light on my line, watching it cut through the water at a sharp angle. He was yelling at me to keep the tip up, to let it run. All the standard advice for fighting a big fish, but this didn't feel like a fish. The way it was pulling, the sheer power behind it, felt wrong somehow. Fish run in bursts, they make quick movements, they jump and thrash. This thing was just pulling steadily, relentlessly, dragging my line deeper into the lake. I fought it for maybe 3 or 4 minutes, my arms burning with the effort, before the line suddenly went slack. Whatever had been on the other end had either thrown the hook or bitten through the line. I reeled in quickly and found that the line had been severed cleanly, not frayed or broken like it would be if a fish had pulled too hard. It looked like it had been cut with scissors. Connor examined the line and said maybe I'd snagged a sharp rock, but I knew that wasn't right. Rocks don't move. Don't pull your line 40 yards out into a lake with that kind of force. We spent the next few minutes re-rigging my line and debating what I'd hooked into. Connor suggested it might have been a really big bass, or maybe even a pike, though pike weren't supposed to be in this lake according to the guy who told us about it. I didn't share my growing suspicion that whatever had grabbed my line wasn't a fish at all. We'd been fishing for hours without a single bite, and then suddenly something attacks my lure with enough force to almost pull the rod out of my hands. It didn't add up. Around 10:30 p.m., Connor got a hit. His rod bent forward and he started reeling, a big grin on his face. But the grin faded quickly as he realized what I'd already figured out. Whatever was on his line was moving the same way mine had, pulling steadily and powerfully toward deeper water. He fought it for a few minutes, his arms shaking with the effort, before his line went slack too. When he reeled in, his line had been severed in the exact same way mine had been. We looked at each other in the darkness, our headlamps casting weird shadows across our faces, and I could see the concern in Connor's eyes that I was feeling in my gut. Something was in that lake, something that wasn't a fish, and it was cutting our lines. Connor said maybe we should call it a night and try again in the morning when we could actually see what we were dealing with. I agreed immediately. There was something deeply unsettling about sitting at the edge of a dark lake, unable to see what was in the water, knowing that something down there was aware of us. We gathered up our gear and were walking back toward camp when I heard splashing behind us. I turned around and shined my light back at the water's edge. The surface was disturbed, ripples spreading out from a point about 10 feet from shore. As I watched, something broke the surface for just a moment before disappearing back under. I didn't get a clear look at it, just a glimpse of something dark and glistening, but it was definitely not a fish. It was too big, too solid looking. Connor saw it too and grabbed my arm, pulling me back toward camp. We practically ran the last 20 yards, both of us spooked in a way that felt almost childish but completely justified at the same time. When we reached our tents, we built up the fire and sat close to it, as if the light and heat could protect us from whatever was in that lake. For a while, neither of us spoke. We just sat there, listening to the sounds of the forest at night, both of us very aware of the water just yards away from where we were sitting. Around midnight, Connor asked if we should just pack up and leave. Part of me wanted to agree, wanted to hike back to the car in the darkness and get as far away from Mirror Lake as possible. But another part of me, the stubborn part that hated giving up on anything, said we should at least wait until morning. We'd come all this way, had all this gear set up. It seemed ridiculous to abandon everything because of some weird fish behavior and our own overactive imaginations. We decided to take shifts keeping watch, which sounds paranoid as I write this. but at the time it felt necessary. Connor took the first shift while I tried to sleep in my tent. I say tried because actual sleep was impossible. Every sound seemed amplified. The crackling of the fire, the rustling of leaves in the breeze, and worst of all, the occasional splash from the direction of the lake. Each splash made my heart race, made me wonder what was out there in the darkness, moving through the water. Around 2 a.m., Connor woke me up, saying it was my turn to keep watch. He looked exhausted, his eyes red and heavy-lidded. I asked if anything had happened, and he shook his head. But something in his expression told me he wasn't being completely honest. He went into his tent and zipped it shut while I took up position by the fire, feeding it more wood to keep it burning bright. The next 2 hours were some of the longest of my life. I sat there in the darkness, my headlamp switched off to preserve battery, watching the fire and listening to every sound. Twice, I heard what sounded like footsteps in the shallow water near shore. A wet, sloshing sound like someone or something wading through the lake. Both times I grabbed my flashlight and pointed it toward the sound, but there was never anything visible, just dark water and the reflection of my light on the surface. Around 3:30 a.m., something happened that made me seriously consider waking Connor and insisting we leave immediately. I was staring into the fire, maybe half asleep despite my best efforts to stay alert, when I heard my name being called. Not shouted, just spoken in a normal conversational tone, but clear enough to snap me fully awake. It was Connor's voice, coming from the direction of the lake. I turned toward his tent and saw that the zipper was still closed. Saw the shape of him sleeping inside through the thin tent fabric. If Connor was in his tent, who had just called my name? I stood up, my heart pounding, and looked toward the water. At first I didn't see anything. Then I heard it again. Kyle. Spoken in that same casual tone, still using Connor's voice. It was coming from the lake, from somewhere near the water's edge, but slightly to the left of our camp. I grabbed my flashlight with shaking hands and pointed it in that direction. The beam illuminated the shore, the rocks, the lapping water, but nothing else. No person, no animal, nothing that could have been speaking. I swept the light back and forth, my breath coming in short, panicked gasps, but the source of the voice remained invisible. And then I heard it a third time. Kyle, come here. Still in Connor's voice. But now there was something off about it. The tone was slightly wrong, the inflection not quite matching how Connor actually spoke. I woke Connor up immediately, shaking his tent and telling him we needed to leave right now. He was groggy and confused, asking what was wrong, and I told him that something had been calling my name using his voice. That got his attention. He unzipped his tent and came out, looking around our camp with wide, alert eyes. I expected him to laugh it off, to tell me I'd been dreaming or mishear something, but he didn't. Instead, he said something that made my blood run cold. He told me that during his watch, he'd heard someone calling his name using my voice. He'd convinced himself he'd imagined it, that he was just tired and his mind was playing tricks on him. But now that I was reporting the same thing, there was no denying it. Something in or around that lake was mimicking our voices, trying to lure us toward the water. We didn't bother packing up properly. We just grabbed our most important gear, our phones, keys, wallets, and started hiking back toward the trailhead in the darkness. The hike up was treacherous, our headlamps providing minimal light on the overgrown trail, both of us stumbling over roots and rocks in our haste to get away from that lake. Behind us, I kept hearing sounds, branches snapping, leaves rustling, like something was following us through the forest. But every time I turned around and shined my light back down the trail, there was nothing there. We made it back to Connor's truck around 5 a.m., just as the first hints of dawn were starting to lighten the sky. We threw our gear in the back and got out of there as fast as the dirt road would allow. Neither of us spoke during the drive back to Spokane. What was there to say? We'd both experienced the same impossible thing, heard our own voices calling to us from the darkness near that lake. When we got back to town, Connor dropped me off at my apartment and said he needed some time to process what had happened. I understood completely. I spent the next week researching Mirror Lake, trying to find any information about strange occurrences or local legends associated with it. What I found disturbed me more than I expected. There were several old news articles from the 1980s and 90s about missing hikers and fishermen in that area. Most of them had last been seen heading toward Mirror Lake. In each case, search parties had found some of their gear near the lake's shore, but the people themselves were never recovered. One article mentioned that searchers had reported hearing voices calling out from the forest around the lake. Voices that sounded like the missing people. Several searchers claimed they'd followed these voices deeper into the woods, only to realize they were being led in circles, that the voices were always just ahead of them, always just out of sight. I called the guy who'd originally told us about Mirror Lake, wanting to ask him if he'd ever experienced anything strange there. His phone number was disconnected. I tried to find him on social media, but he seemed to have deleted all his accounts. It was like he'd disappeared completely. That's when I started to wonder if maybe he'd known more than he'd let on. If maybe he'd sent us to that lake on purpose. But why? What would he have to gain from putting us in danger? Connor and I haven't been fishing together since that night. It's not that we're avoiding each other exactly, but there's this unspoken agreement between us that we don't want to talk about what happened, don't want to acknowledge it out loud. I've gone fishing a few times since then with other friends, but I can't enjoy it anymore. Every time I'm near water at night, every time I'm in a quiet, isolated spot, I find myself listening for my name being called in a voice that isn't quite right. Last week, I got a text message from an unknown number. All it said was, "Kyle, come back." The area code was local to Spokane, but when I tried calling the number back, it went straight to a disconnected message. I showed the text to Connor, and he went pale. He said he'd gotten the same message 2 days earlier, with his name instead of mine, from a different unknown number. We both blocked the numbers and tried to forget about it, but I can't shake the feeling that whatever's at Mirror Lake isn't done with us yet. It called to us once, used our own voices against us, and now it's reaching out across the distance, reminding us that it knows who we are. I don't know what it wants or why it's targeting us specifically, but I do know one thing for certain. I will never, ever go back to Mirror Lake. And if you're ever near Spokane, if you ever hear about a secluded fishing spot called Mirror Lake, do yourself a favor and stay far, far away. Some places are beautiful for a reason. They're bait, luring you in with the promise of peace and solitude, only to reveal their true nature when you're too isolated, too vulnerable to escape. Mirror Lake is one of those places, and whatever lives there is still waiting, still calling out in stolen voices, hoping for someone foolish enough to answer. I have been a truck driver since I was 27, and I've done a lot of night drives, and of course had my fair share of odd experiences. I did deliveries for a number of different types of companies. Often I'd have to drive across state to make shipments to the receiving companies or stores. One day I had to drive literally from one side of Nevada to the other to deliver a trailer full of wooden furniture items. Much of the drive was through open desert roads. It was going to be many hours, and I already had a late start to the day, so I knew a majority of my drive would be in the dark, given the nature of these desert roads at night. How straight they are and how little traffic there is, it meant I could push the truck a little faster than I would on other roads. This meant that when I saw the flashing rear lights of a car in the horizon, I had to hit the brakes a little extra hard to bring the truck to a stop. When I finally pulled up behind the car, it was an old Dodge Charger parked on the side of the road in the desert dirt. It had its hazards on. I got out of my truck because, of course, I had to be a good Samaritan and check if they needed help. I walked over to the car and tapped on the window, only to get no kind of response. I bent down a little to look into the car through the tinted window. There didn't seem to be anyone sitting inside. I did the same thing for all 3 other seats, and could confirm there wasn't anyone in the car. So I looked out into the cool, dark desert that the road ran through, though I couldn't see any further than maybe 25 yards in front of me. I was feeling especially helpful this night for some reason. So I went back to my truck and got a flashlight from the toolbox that sat underneath the passenger seat. It was a heavy-duty tactical flashlight that was so bright it would hurt your eyes to look directly at it. As soon as I turned it on, it revealed what appeared to be an abandoned gas station on the side of the road. Apparently, I hadn't noticed it before. I guess the reason I didn't realize it before was because the whole fill-up or parking area was basically dirt. There wasn't any concrete. There were also only 2 gas pumps. Behind them was a small building, probably an old quick-stop store at one point. It would make the most sense that whoever's car was over there would be in that building. I went to the front door, which was permanently jammed open, and the flashlight lit up a decent portion of the room inside. It was what I thought, a big convenience store you'd find at many gas stations. Or at least it used to be. It was no wonder it didn't last on a road like this, though. I called out to let anybody know of my presence and that I was there to help. There was the slightest bit of echo in the room, which gave me chills for some reason. Then I heard something. Probably a shoe scrape against the floor on the opposite side of the room behind a few shelves that were probably once filled with snack items and drinks. I called out once again, offering my help if it was needed. Then I heard a deep, heavy whisper saying, "Get out!" I understood what was said immediately, but I didn't understand why whoever said it would say that. I was also hearing heavy breathing in one corner of the room. It was enough to make me get the hell out of there in a hurry. On my walk back to my truck, this is what I heard. A woman screaming. And there had to be at least 7 seconds of confusion. I didn't know if what I was hearing was real or not, if that even makes sense. I ran to my truck and called 911 because, to be honest, I was too scared to go back in that building. They asked for an exact location and I couldn't tell them. All I could say was that I was by an abandoned gas station on some road in the desert. They asked me to stay on the line so I could describe my location better. But suddenly the car in front of me turned on, started speeding down the desert road. I didn't even notice him get into his car. It's so dark and I was so distracted by the phone call. I ran back into the building to see if anybody was still in there, while of course keeping 911 on the line. I went to the back section where I'd heard the voice and breathing, and I was mortified to see a fresh pool of blood on the floor. I could only imagine what had happened. I explained into the phone that I believed I just stumbled into a crime scene. Eventually, they were able to send a bunch of state troopers to the scene. They asked me for any information I could give. License plate number, what the suspect looked like, what I thought happened. All I said was it was a dark blue Dodge Charger, early 2000s. And I heard a man tell me to get out before hearing a woman screaming as they left the building. There was no body left behind, but I had a few ideas of what might have happened. I'm sure the state police took some blood samples and whatnot, but I wasn't able to be of much more assistance. Shamefully, I did not have a dash cam at that point to get the license plate number, but literally the next week I installed the dash cam into my assigned truck. This was just one of those once-in-a-lifetime experiences that will always haunt me. My name is Dr. Rachel Kwan, and I'm a wildlife biologist specializing in Arctic fox populations. I've spent winters in remote research stations across Canada, from Nunavut to the Northwest Territories. I'm not easily spooked. I've dealt with polar bears, been stranded in blizzards, spent months in complete isolation, but what happened in the Yukon last December has made me reconsider everything I thought I knew about being alone in the wilderness. The research cabin was located about 80 kilometers north of Dawson City, accessible only by snowmobile or helicopter. It was a small structure, basically one main room with a wood stove, a cot, a desk, and some storage. Solar panels and a backup generator for power. A satellite phone for emergencies. Everything I needed for a 6-week solo observation period during the polar night. I arrived on December 3rd, when the sun had already stopped rising above the horizon. Up here, winter means 24 hours of darkness from late November through mid-January. Most people can't handle it. The isolation, the endless dark, the cold. But I'd done this before. I actually preferred it. No distractions, just my work and the quiet. The first week was routine. I'd snowshoe out to my observation points, set up camera traps, record data on fox dens and movement patterns. Back at the cabin by what would have been evening, I'd eat dinner, analyze my data, read, sleep. The darkness didn't bother me. I had my headlamp, the cabin lights, and the occasional shimmer of northern lights to break up the black. On the 8th night, I heard the first knock. I was sitting at my desk, typing up field notes, when it came. 3 distinct knocks on the cabin wall. Tap, 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 evenly spaced, deliberate. I looked up, listening. Nothing. Probably a branch, I thought, or ice falling from the roof. I went back to my work. 5 minutes later, tap, 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 same wall, same rhythm. I got up and checked outside with my spotlight. Nothing. Just snow and darkness and the dark shapes of spruce trees. The temperature was -37°C. Nothing should be moving out there. I convinced myself it was the cabin settling in the cold. Old wood contracting. Perfectly normal. The knocking came again the next night. Same time, around what would have been 9 p.m. 3 knocks, same wall. I tried to ignore it, but after it happened 4 times in an hour, I grabbed my spotlight and went outside to investigate. The beam of light swept across the snow around the cabin. No tracks, no animal signs. Nothing. The snow was undisturbed except for my own paths to and from the observation sites. On the third night, the pattern changed. 3 knocks, then silence, then 3 more knocks from a different wall, then another wall. The knocking was moving around the cabin in a circle. I stood in the center of the room, turning slowly, tracking the sound as it circled. Whatever was making it was moving around the entire perimeter of the cabin. In -40 weather, leaving no tracks. Hello? I called out. My voice sounded small and stupid. Is someone there? The knocking stopped. Complete silence. Then after about 30 seconds, it came from directly above me. 3 knocks on the roof. My heart was pounding. I grabbed the satellite phone and almost called for pickup right then. But what would I say? That I heard knocking? They'd think I was losing it, getting cabin fever after barely a week. I decided to document it instead. I set up my audio recorder and left it running all night. The knocking continued. Always 3 knocks. Always moving. Sometimes on the walls, sometimes on the roof. Once even seeming to come from under the floor. I didn't sleep. I sat on my cot with a hunting knife in my hand, watching the walls, listening. Around 4 a.m. something new happened. A voice, muffled, distant, but definitely a voice, calling my name. Rachel! Rachel! I froze. Nobody out here knew my name except... No, that wasn't possible. The nearest person was 80 kilometers away. Rachel, let me in. It's so cold. The voice was coming from right outside the door. I stared at it, watching the handle, expecting it to turn, but it didn't move. The voice just kept calling, getting more urgent, more desperate. Please! I'm freezing. Rachel, please. Just open the door. Every instinct screamed at me not to. I pressed my back against the far wall and waited. The voice continued for about 10 minutes, then faded away. The knocking resumed. In the morning, or what passed for morning in the permanent darkness, I checked outside again. Still no tracks. The snow around the door was completely undisturbed. I listened to the audio recording, my voice asking if someone was there. Silence. Then my own voice again. Rachel, let me in. It's so cold. The voice asking to be let in was mine. My exact voice, my inflection, everything, but I hadn't said those words. I called the research coordinator on the satellite phone, tried to explain what was happening without sounding crazy. He suggested I might be experiencing auditory hallucinations due to isolation and the darkness. Told me to take vitamin D supplements, get more sleep, maybe come back early if I wasn't comfortable. But I could hear it in his voice. He thought I was cracking, and maybe I was. Maybe none of this was real. That night, I didn't hear knocking. Instead, I heard footsteps on the roof, back and forth, like someone pacing. Heavy footsteps that made the wooden beams creak, then the voice again. But this time, it wasn't mine. It was my mother's voice. My mother, who'd been dead for 3 years. Rachel, honey, why won't you let me in? I've been out here so long. I'm so cold. Please, baby, just open the door. I put my hands over my ears and screamed at it to stop. The voice changed. My ex-boyfriend, my thesis advisor, my childhood friend. One after another, voices of people from my life, all begging to be let in, all claiming to be freezing, all perfectly mimicked. This went on for hours. I huddled on my cot, knife in hand, crying, trying to convince myself it wasn't real. Around 2 a.m., everything went quiet. The footsteps stopped. The voices stopped. Even the wind outside seemed to die down. Then I heard scratching, soft at first, then growing louder. Something was scratching at the door, not random scratching, deliberate, like someone trying to dig through the wood with their fingernails. I watched as thin scratches began appearing on the inside of the door. Long parallel lines like claw marks appearing from nothing. The wood was being scored from the inside, even though nothing was there. That's when I noticed the temperature. The cabin was getting colder. My breath was fogging despite the wood stove burning. Frost was forming on the windows, on the walls, spreading in crystalline patterns. The scratching grew more frantic. The door was rattling now, shaking in its frame, even though I could see nothing touching it. Then a new sound, whispering. Dozens of voices all whispering at once, overlapping, creating a horrible susurrus that seemed to come from everywhere and nowhere. I couldn't make out individual words, just the constant hiss of voices, getting louder and louder. Something pressed against the wall next to me. I watched as the wood bowed inward, as if something large was pushing against it from outside. Then another wall, then another. The entire cabin was being pressed from all sides, the walls creaking and groaning. "What do you want?" I screamed. "What the hell do you want?" The whispers stopped. One voice spoke, clear and close, right next to my ear even though nothing was there. "We want to know what it's like," it said. "To be warm, to be alive. We've forgotten. Who are you? We're the ones who didn't make it. The ones who froze. The ones who starved. The ones who went mad in the darkness and walked out into the snow. We've been here so long, Rachel, wandering, waiting. And now you're here, alone, in our darkness." The pressure on the walls increased. The wood was splintering now. One of the windows cracked with a sound like a gunshot. "We can't come in," the voice continued. "Not unless you let us, but we can wait. We're very patient, and you'll have to leave eventually. The door will open, and we'll be there. I'll call for pickup. I'll leave tomorrow, will you?" The voice sounded amused. "You'll walk out to your radio cache to call for the helicopter. Half a kilometer through the darkness, through the trees, through the deep snow. You'll never make it. The moment you step outside, we'll be with you. In the dark, where you can't see. And Rachel, there are so many of us." I spent the rest of that night barricading myself in the cabin, pushed the desk against the door, piled supplies against the walls. The sounds continued, knocking, scratching, voices, footsteps, but nothing got in. At dawn, or what should have been dawn but was still pitch black, I made my decision. I packed only essentials: the satellite phone, emergency flares, my GPS, a thermos of hot coffee. I'd have to make it to the radio cache to call for emergency extraction. Half a kilometer, 12 minutes on snowshoes in good conditions. I stood at the door for a long time, hand on the handle, knowing that opening it was possibly the last thing I'd ever do. When I finally opened it, the darkness outside seemed to surge forward, thick and alive. My headlamp cut through it, showing only snow and trees. Nothing moving. Nothing there. I stepped out and started walking. I heard them immediately. Footsteps in the snow all around me, matching my pace. Heavy breathing that wasn't my own. Whispers in the darkness just beyond my light. I walked faster. The footsteps got closer. I could feel them right behind me, beside me, in front of me. The temperature was dropping impossibly lower. My lungs burned with each breath. "Rachel," they whispered. "Stop. Rest. It's so much easier if you just stop." I didn't stop. I ran. My snowshoes tangled and I fell, face first into the snow. When I looked up, I saw them. Figures standing in the darkness. Dozens of them. Gray, translucent, their faces hollow and hungry. Some were dressed in old-fashioned cold-weather gear, others in modern clothes. Some looked like they'd been frozen solid, their skin black with frostbite. Others had no faces at all, just smooth expanses of ice. They moved closer, slowly, like they had all the time in the world. I struggled to my feet and kept going. The radio cache was close now. I could see it, a small metal box mounted on a post. The figures didn't follow beyond a certain point. They stopped at the edge of my light, watching as I reached the cache and made the call. "This is Dr. Rachel Kwan at Research Station 7. Emergency extraction requested. Immediate. Please confirm." Static. Then, "Dr. Kwan, this is base. Confirm emergency status?" "Confirmed. I need pickup now. As soon as possible. Roger that. Helicopter will arrive at 0800. Can you hold position?" I looked back at the cabin. The figures were standing around it now, dozens of them, maybe more, all facing outward. Waiting. Negative. "I'm staying at the cache. Do not ask me to return to the cabin." There was a pause. "Understood. Stay on the line. Help is coming." I huddled next to the radio cache for the next 4 hours, my headlamp battery dying, watching the figures watch me. They never came closer. Never spoke again, just waited in the darkness. The helicopter arrived as the first gray hints of twilight touched the horizon. The pilot looked concerned when he saw me. I must have looked half frozen, definitely traumatized. "Are you hurt?" he asked as I climbed aboard. "No, just get me out of here." As we lifted off, I looked down at the cabin. The figures were gone, just a small structure in an ocean of snow and darkness. The pilot told me later that they found strange marks on the cabin walls. Deep scratches both inside and out. Patterns in the snow that didn't match any known animal. The audio equipment I'd left behind had recorded hours of sounds, but when they analyzed it, it was just static interspersed with what sounded like voices speaking in no known language. They shut down the research station, said the isolation protocols needed review. But I know the real reason. Some places aren't meant for the living, especially not during the long darkness, when the boundary between the dead and the living grows thin. I still do wildlife research, but never alone, never in winter, and never ever in a place where the sun doesn't rise. Because I learned something in that cabin. In the Arctic darkness, we're not alone. We're never alone. The cold and the dark are full of things that used to be human, that remember what warmth felt like, what life felt like, and they want it back. My name is Alex, I'm 23, and I just quit my job at Spirit Halloween. I know that sounds dramatic, it's just a seasonal retail job, right? But after what happened on October 30th, I can't go back. I won't go back, and I need to warn anyone else who might be working closing shifts alone. I started at the Spirit Halloween in the Westfield Mall back in September. Easy job, decent pay, mostly just helping customers find costumes and restocking shelves. The store was set up in an old Bed Bath & Beyond space. Huge fluorescent lights, concrete floors, that distinctive smell of new plastic and polyester. My manager, Derek, was in his 40s, perpetually tired, running on energy drinks. He'd managed seasonal Halloween stores for 15 years. "This is my last year," he told me during training. "After this, I'm done with retail forever." The first month was fine. Busy, but fine. Families looking for kids' costumes, college students buying decorations, the usual October rush. But I started noticing things as we got closer to Halloween. The mannequins. We had maybe 30 of them throughout the store, displaying costumes. Standard featureless white mannequins, the kind you see everywhere. But several times a shift, I'd swear one had moved. I'd remember a pirate mannequin being in the corner. Then I'd walk by and it would be 3 feet to the left, or facing a different direction. I mentioned it to Derek once. He laughed. "Yeah, happens every year. Customers move them around, knock them over. Don't worry about it. Just put them back where they belong." But customers weren't in the store when it happened. I'd be alone in an aisle, organizing masks, and I'd hear the soft thump of something falling. I'd go look, and a mannequin would be on its side, nowhere near where I'd last seen it standing. On October 28th, Derek told me I'd be closing alone on the 30th. I know it sucks, but we're short-staffed, and we need someone responsible. Store closes at 10 p.m. Just do the closing checklist, lock up, and set the alarm. You'll be out by 10:30, I agreed. The extra hours meant extra money. October 30th. My shift started at 6 p.m. Derek left at 8, giving me the keys and the alarm code. "Don't forget to check the back room," he said. "Sometimes customers wander back there. And make sure all the mannequins are where they're supposed to be. Regional manager's coming tomorrow for a final walkthrough before Halloween." The last customers left around 9:45. I locked the front entrance and started the closing routine. Straighten the aisles, return any misplaced items, count the register. Standard stuff. The store felt different, empty. The fluorescent lights hummed. The Halloween music we'd been playing on loop all day was off, leaving just silence and that electrical buzz. All those costumes and masks and decorations that seemed fun and campy during the day looked wrong somehow in the quiet. I was in aisle 3, straightening vampire capes. When I heard footsteps, I froze, listening. Soft footsteps, like someone walking slowly through the store. "Hello?" I called out. "Store's closed. You need to leave." The footsteps stopped. I walked toward where I'd heard them. Aisle 7, near the animatronics. No one there. Just the motion-activated werewolf display, thankfully not moving. If someone's hiding, this isn't funny. I'm calling security. Silence. I went back to closing. Probably just the building settling, or sounds from the mall corridor outside. 10 minutes later, I was checking the back room when I heard it again. Footsteps. Definitely footsteps. And they were coming from the main floor, moving through the aisles. I grabbed my phone and walked back out. I'm serious. "I'm calling the cops if..." I stopped. The mannequins had moved. I'd spent an hour before we closed putting them all back in their correct positions per the store layout. I knew exactly where each one belonged, but now they were different. The pirate was in aisle 2 instead of aisle 5. The witch was facing backward. The clown was in the center aisle, standing directly under a light, facing the back room. Facing me. My hands were shaking. I pulled up Derek's number, but there was no signal. The mall's concrete structure always made cell service spotty, but I'd had 2 bars just a minute ago. Now nothing. I needed to get out. Forget the closing checklist. I'd lock the door, set the alarm from outside, and leave. I walked quickly toward the front entrance, keys in hand. Behind me I heard it. Footsteps. Multiple footsteps. All moving at once, I ran. I didn't look back, just ran for the front door, fumbling with the keys. My hands were shaking so badly I dropped them. The keys clattered on the concrete floor. The footsteps stopped. I bent down, grabbed the keys, looked up at the glass door, and saw the reflection. Every mannequin in the store was standing in the aisles behind me, not where they'd been displayed. They were all in the main walkways, spread throughout the store, and they were all facing my direction, all facing me. I unlocked the door, yanked it open, and stumbled out into the mall corridor. The door swung shut behind me. Through the glass, I could see into the store. The mannequins were still there, motionless, spread throughout the aisles. I stood there for maybe 30 seconds, breathing hard, staring. They didn't move. They were just mannequins. Plastic and foam and fiberglass. Nothing more. My phone buzzed. Signal was back. A text from Derek. Everything good? Almost done? I looked at the store. The mannequins stood where they were, lifeless. Maybe I'd been wrong about where they'd been. Maybe I'd misremembered. Maybe the stress of working alone had made me paranoid. I texted back, "Yeah, almost finished. Had a weird moment, but I'm fine." His response came immediately. "What kind of weird moment?" "Thought the mannequins moved." I know that sounds crazy. 3 dots appeared, disappeared, appeared again. Then, "Get out. Leave right now. Don't go back inside." My stomach dropped. "What? Why?" "Just go. I'm calling the cops. Don't go back in that store." But I'd left my car keys inside. They were in my jacket pocket, and my jacket was hanging in the back room. I looked through the glass. The store looked normal now. Bright, empty, just a Halloween store. I needed my keys. I'd just run in, grab my jacket, and leave. I unlocked the door and stepped inside. The motion-activated decorations all triggered at once. The werewolf howled. The witch cackled. The zombie reached out with jerky movements. The entire store erupted in overlapping sounds, screams, laughter, chains rattling, all at maximum volume. And the mannequins, they were closer. I hadn't seen them move, but they were closer. The pirate that had been in aisle 2 was now at the end of the aisle, near the main walkway. The witch was 3 feet from the back room door. The clown was directly in my path. I ran. The decorations shrieked and howled as I passed, motion sensors triggering one after another. I reached the back room, grabbed my jacket, and turned to leave. The clown mannequin was in the doorway. I hadn't heard it move, hadn't seen it. But it was there, featureless white face at eye level, arms at its sides, wearing that rainbow wig and red foam nose. I backed up. The back room was small. Desk, some chairs, boxes of inventory. One exit, and it was blocked. The mannequin tilted its head. It tilted its head. Plastic and foam don't move like that. They don't shift and adjust. But I watched it happen. The head turned slowly, that blank face angling as if studying me. Then it raised one arm, slowly, mechanically, like a robot learning to move. Its hand stretched toward me. I screamed and shoved past it, knocking it backward. It fell with a hollow thud. I ran through the store, weaving between displays, not looking back, just running for the entrance. I burst through the door into the mall corridor. This time I didn't stop. I ran all the way to the security office on the other side of the mall. 2 security guards and 3 police officers went back with me. Derek arrived 10 minutes later, looking pale. The store was normal. The mannequins were all back in their display positions. The motion-activated decorations were off. Everything was exactly as it should be. Maybe someone was hiding inside, one cop suggested. Move things around to mess with you. They checked the security footage. I watched it with them on the grainy monitor. The footage showed me closing the store, straightening aisles, walking to the back room. Then it showed me standing at the front door, staring at nothing for 30 seconds. Then I went back inside, went to the back room, grabbed my jacket and ran out. That was it. No mannequins moving, no running through the aisles. Just me, acting strangely, then leaving. Looks like you psyched yourself out, the security guard said, not unkindly. Working alone in a Halloween store. Easy to get spooked. But Derek pulled me aside. It happened to you too, he said quietly. Didn't it? What do you mean, too? It's why I'm quitting. It happened to me last year. October 30th. Closing alone. The mannequins. He stopped, shaking his head. Everyone thinks I'm crazy, but I know what I saw. What are they? I whispered. I don't know. But it's always October 30th. The night before Halloween, and it's always the closing shift when you're alone. Whatever they are, they're waiting for something. Waiting for what? He looked at me with haunted eyes. I think they're waiting for Halloween night, when they can finally finish whatever they started. I quit the next morning. Derek did too. The store hired 2 new people to work Halloween night. I don't know their names. I hope they were together. I hope they weren't alone. Because 3 days ago, I drove past that old Bed Bath & Beyond space. Spirit Halloween has packed up for the year. The space is empty now, windows papered over, dark inside. But I saw something in the window. Just for a second, barely visible through a gap in the paper. A mannequin, standing in the empty store, alone in the darkness, and I swear to God, it was facing the window, watching the street, waiting for next October.
I used to work as a medical records clerk at St. Vincent's Hospital in Pittsburgh. Night shift, 11 p.m. to 7 a.m., 3 nights a week. It paid better than days, and honestly, I liked the quiet. Most of the time, I'd be alone in the records room in the basement, scanning documents, filing paperwork. The building was old, built in 1952, and everything down there had that musty smell you can't quite get rid of. This happened in March of 2019. I remember because it was right after my daughter's 8th birthday, around 2 a.m. I needed to retrieve a file from the overflow storage room at the end of the hall. The basement hallway was long, maybe 70 feet, with those industrial fluorescent lights that hummed constantly. Half of them were always flickering. I was walking down when I saw someone coming toward me from the other end. A woman in scrubs. I could see her shape clearly, average height, dark hair pulled back. I figured she was coming from the morgue area, which was accessed through a side corridor down there. Here's the thing. As we got closer, I started to notice details. She was wearing the same color scrubs as me, that teal blue that St. Vincent's used for clerical staff, not the navy that nurses wore. And her hair. It was in the same messy ponytail I'd put mine in that night. I was about 15 feet away when I realized she was walking the exact same way I walk, this kind of heavy-footed gait because I have flat feet. I slowed down, she slowed down, I stopped completely, feeling this cold weight drop into my stomach. She stopped. We were maybe 10 feet apart now, and the overhead light between us was flickering badly, making it hard to see her face clearly. But I could see enough. The shape of her jaw, the small mole on her left cheek. I was looking at myself. My mouth went dry. I wanted to scream, to run, but I couldn't move. It just stood there, head tilted slightly to the side, watching me with my own eyes. Then slowly she smiled. Not a friendly smile. Something wrong. Too wide, the light above her went out completely. I ran. I don't even remember making the decision. I just turned and ran back to the records room, slammed the door, and locked it. My hands were shaking so badly I could barely turn the deadbolt. I called my supervisor, told her I was sick, and left. I didn't go back to that hallway. I didn't go back to that job at all, actually. I gave my 2 weeks' notice over the phone and never set foot in that basement again. But here's what keeps me up at night. 2 weeks after I quit, I ran into Marissa, one of the ER nurses I was friendly with. We grabbed coffee and she asked why I'd left so suddenly. I told her I'd gotten a better offer somewhere else, didn't mention what really happened. Then she said something that made my blood turn to ice. "That's funny," she said, stirring her latte, "because I saw you down in the basement last week." Tuesday night around 2 a.m. I was taking some charts down to records and I saw you in the hallway. I called your name, but you just stood there staring at me, then walked into the overflow storage room. I figured you were pissed at me or something. I hadn't worked there in 2 weeks, and Tuesday night I'd been home with my daughter watching a movie. I never told Marissa the truth. What would I even say? Sometimes when I'm lying in bed at night, I think about that thing wearing my face, still walking that basement hallway, waiting for someone else to see it. Waiting for me to come back. I never will.
My name is David Tremblay, and I've lived in Montreal my entire life. I know this city like the back of my hand. Every street, every shortcut, every metro station. I've taken the last train home more times than I can count. But what happened 3 months ago has made me terrified of the underground. I work as a line cook at a restaurant in Old Montreal. Most nights I'm done by 11, but that Thursday we had a private event that ran late. By the time I cleaned my station and changed out of my work clothes, it was almost 1 in the morning. I'd missed my usual metro and had to catch the last train on the Orange Line. The Champ de Mars station was nearly empty when I descended the escalator. Just me, a security guard doing his rounds, and a homeless man sleeping on a bench near the entrance. The fluorescent lights gave everything a sickly yellow tinge. My footsteps echoed on the tile floor as I walked to the platform. I checked the digital display. Last train, 12:47 a.m. I had 3 minutes. The platform was deserted. Usually there are at least a few other late-night workers, students, bar staff heading home. But tonight, nobody. Just empty benches and the stale smell of underground air. I stood near the yellow safety line, scrolling through my phone, when I felt it. That pressure change in the air that comes before a train arrives. The rumble of wheels on tracks. I looked up. The train emerged from the tunnel, its lights cutting through the darkness. As it slowed to a stop, I noticed something odd. The cars were completely dark inside except for the standard safety lighting, and I couldn't see anyone through the windows. No passengers at all. The doors opened with a pneumatic hiss. I stepped into the nearest car. It was freezing inside. Montreal metros are usually warm, especially in October, but this felt like stepping into a refrigerator. My breath fogged in front of my face. I looked around the car. Empty. Not just empty of people, but empty of the usual litter too. No forgotten newspapers, no coffee cups, no advertisements hanging from the straps. Just bare metal poles and worn seats. The doors closed. The train lurched forward. I sat down near the middle of the car, pulling my jacket tighter. The cold was getting worse. I could hear the familiar rhythm of the metro, the clacking of wheels, the slight squeal as we took curves. But something was off. The sound was muffled, distant, like I was hearing it through water. At Berry-UQAM, the next stop, the train slowed. I watched the platform slide past the windows. Empty. The doors opened. Nobody got on. The doors closed. We moved again. That's when I realized I couldn't see the station name signs anymore. The windows showed only darkness punctuated by the occasional service light. We should have been approaching Sherbrooke Station, but there was nothing outside, just black tunnel. I pulled out my phone to check the metro map. No signal, which was normal underground. But my phone's clock was acting strange. The numbers were flickering, jumping between different times. 12:51, 1:34, 11:47, 2:03. A sound made me look up. Footsteps, someone walking between cars. The door at the far end of the car opened, and a figure stepped through. A man in a gray business suit carrying a briefcase. He walked with a strange, stiff gait and sat down at the opposite end of the car, facing away from me. I felt relief. I wasn't alone. Crazy cold in here, right? I called out in French. He didn't respond. Didn't turn around. Just sat there, perfectly still. Maybe he had headphones in. Maybe he didn't want to be bothered. I went back to looking at my phone, trying to ignore the gnawing unease in my stomach. The train should have reached Sherbrooke by now, then Mont-Royal, then Laurier, but we just kept moving through darkness, the rhythm of the wheels never changing. No stops, no stations. I stood up and walked to the window, pressing my face against the glass. Nothing. Complete darkness. Not even the emergency lights you usually see in the tunnels. It was like we were moving through a void. Behind me, I heard the door open again. More footsteps. I turned. Another passenger had entered. A woman this time, wearing a long coat, her face obscured by her hair. She sat down a few rows behind the man. Same stiff posture. Same absolute stillness. "Excuse me," I said, louder this time. "Do you know what's going on? We should have stopped by now." Neither of them moved. Neither acknowledged me. The door opened again. A teenage boy, then an elderly woman, then a middle-aged man in a security uniform. One after another, passengers filed into the car, each taking a seat, each sitting in that same unnaturally still way, never making a sound except for footsteps. Within 5 minutes, the car was half full, and every single one of them had their back to me. My heart was pounding. This wasn't right. This wasn't possible. Where were they coming from? The train hadn't stopped. There was no other car they could have walked through. I walked toward the rear door, planning to move to another car, to find someone normal, someone who could tell me what was happening. But as I got closer to the seated passengers, I noticed something that made my blood run cold. They weren't breathing. None of them. Their chests weren't moving. And now that I was closer, I could see their skin had a grayish tint, like old meat. I backed away slowly, my hand fumbling for the emergency intercom button. I found it and pressed. "Hello? Is anyone there? Something's wrong. I need..." Static. Then a voice, barely audible through the interference. "Identify yourself." "My name is David Tremblay. I'm on the last train, Orange Line, heading toward Côte Vertu. Something's very wrong. The train won't stop and there are..." The lights in the car flickered. Once. Twice. When they came back on, all the passengers were facing me. I saw their faces clearly for the first time. Some were rotted, skin hanging loose. Others were burned. One had no face at all, just a smooth blank surface where features should have been. But all of them were staring at me with empty eyes. "Jesus Christ," I whispered. One of them stood up. The man in the business suit. He took a step toward me. His mouth opened and I could see there was nothing inside. No tongue, no teeth, just darkness. "Wrong train," he said in a voice like grinding metal. "You took the wrong train." "What are you talking about?" "This is the Orange Line. I take it every..." "This train doesn't go to your station," the woman said, standing now. Her voice was the same, broken, wrong. "This train goes somewhere else." They all stood up. 10, 15, 20 figures, all moving toward me with that same jerking puppet-like motion. I ran to the forward door and yanked it open, stumbling into the next car. It was full of them too. Dozens of figures, all turning to look at me as I entered. I ran through into the next car. More. Always more. I was 4 cars deep when I saw him, sitting in the middle of the car, facing forward like all the others. But this one I recognized. It was me. Same jacket, same work pants, same shoes. My own face, gray and lifeless, staring straight ahead. I couldn't breathe. Couldn't move. Couldn't process what I was seeing. My doppelganger slowly turned its head toward me. When it spoke, it used my voice. "You're late, David. You were supposed to be here 3 months ago. The accident. Remember? Accident." The word triggered something. A memory, fuzzy and distant. Coming home late. Being tired. Standing too close to the platform edge. Someone bumping into me. The feeling of falling. The train lights coming. "No," I said. "No, that didn't happen. I'm alive. I'm here. Are you?" It stood up, and all the others stood with it. "Look at your hands, David." I looked down. My hands were gray. My breath wasn't fogging anymore because I wasn't breathing. The cold I felt wasn't from the air. It was from inside me. "The last train," my double said, walking closer. "It picks up everyone who dies in the metro. Everyone who never made it home. We've been waiting for you. You've been running for 3 months, but you always end up here." On the last train, the lights flickered again. Through the windows, I could finally see something other than darkness. A platform. We were pulling into a station, but it wasn't any station I recognized. The signs were in a language I couldn't read, symbols that hurt to look at. The platform was crowded with figures, all waiting, all gray and still like the passengers around me. "Last stop," my double said. "Everyone off." The doors opened. The passengers began filing out, and I felt my body moving too, following them without my permission. I tried to fight it, tried to turn back, but my legs kept walking. As I stepped onto the platform, I looked back at the train. In the window, I saw him, a living passenger, face pressed against the glass, eyes wide with terror. He looked exactly like me, but younger somehow, more alive. He was screaming something I couldn't hear through the glass. The doors closed. The train pulled away, and he was gone. I don't know how long I've been here. Time doesn't work the same way. Sometimes I'm standing on this platform. Sometimes I'm on the train. Sometimes I'm back in Champ de Mars, watching other passengers board, trying to warn them. But they never see me. Last week, I saw someone I recognized, a coworker from the restaurant. He looked confused, scared. He doesn't know yet. None of them do. Not until they see themselves already aboard. If you're reading this, if somehow this message reaches the surface, please be careful on the metro. Stand back from the platform edge. Don't take the last train if you can help it. And if you ever board an empty car, if you feel that terrible cold, if passengers start appearing from nowhere, get off at the next stop, no matter what, even if it means walking the rest of the way home. Because the last train doesn't always take you where you think you're going. Sometimes it takes you where you've already been. There's this lake up in northern Michigan called Blackwood Lake that I've been fishing since I was about 14 years old. My Uncle Dean owned a cabin about half a mile from the shore, and every summer my family would spend a week up there. The lake itself is pretty big, maybe 2 miles across at its widest point, and it's surrounded by dense forest on all sides. Most tourists stick to the main beach area on the eastern shore where there's a boat launch and some picnic tables, but the western side of the lake is almost completely untouched. That's where I always preferred to fish. The thing about Blackwood Lake is that it has this reputation among locals. Nothing concrete, just whispers and old stories that people don't really take seriously. Supposedly, back in the 1950s, a family drowned there when their boat capsized during a storm. The father, mother, and their 8-year-old daughter all went under and never came back up. They dragged the lake for weeks, but only ever recovered the father's body. The mother and daughter were never found. Over the years, people claimed to hear things out on the water at night, voices calling out, sounds of splashing where there shouldn't be any. But like I said, nobody really believed it. It was just one of those spooky local legends that every small town seems to have. This happened last August when I was up at the cabin with my girlfriend, Michelle. We'd been dating for about 8 months, and she'd never been to the lake before. I was excited to show her around, teach her how to fish, all that stuff. We arrived on a Thursday evening, and I suggested we go out fishing first thing Friday morning, right at sunrise when the base would be most active. Michelle wasn't super enthusiastic about waking up that early, but she agreed because she knew how much it meant to me. We woke up around 5:30 a.m. and made the short hike down to the lake, carrying my fishing gear and a small cooler with breakfast and coffee. The sun hadn't come up yet, and the forest was still dark and quiet. When we reached the shore, I could see the lake stretched out before us, perfectly still and covered in a thin layer of mist. It was beautiful, exactly the kind of morning that makes you remember why you love fishing in the first place. I had a small inflatable raft that I'd brought down the night before and hidden in some bushes. It was just big enough for 2 people. Nothing fancy, but it got the job done. We pushed off from shore and I paddled us out to my favorite spot, a deep section about 200 yards from the western shore where the water drops off sharply. The mist was thicker out there, reducing visibility to maybe 30 or 40 feet in any direction. Michelle commented that it was kind of creepy being surrounded by fog like that, but I assured her it would burn off once the sun came up. I handed her one of my rods and showed her how to cast, and for the next half hour we just sat there in comfortable silence, enjoying the peace and quiet. The sun started rising around 6:15, and just like I'd predicted, the mist began to thin out. That's when Michelle pointed something out that I hadn't noticed before. She asked if I heard that, and I stopped reeling to listen. At first, I didn't hear anything unusual, just the normal sounds of the lake. Water lapping against the raft, birds starting to wake up in the forest, that kind of thing. But then I heard it, a voice, distant and faint, coming from somewhere out in the mist. It sounded like someone calling for help. I told Michelle to stay quiet, and we both listened intently. The voice came again, clearer this time. It was definitely someone yelling, though I couldn't make out the exact words. My first thought was that maybe another fisherman had gotten into trouble. Maybe their boat had capsized or they'd fallen overboard. I grabbed the paddle and started moving in the direction of the voice, calling out to ask if they were okay. Michelle grabbed my arm and said maybe we should head back to shore and call for help instead. But I told her we should at least check it out first. If someone was in trouble, every second could matter. We paddled through the thinning mist, following the sound of the voice. It kept calling out, always seeming to be just ahead of us, just out of sight. After about 5 minutes of paddling, I realized we'd traveled much further from shore than I'd intended. I could barely see the tree line anymore. Michelle was getting nervous, saying we should turn back, but I wanted to find whoever was calling out. The voice sounded desperate, scared, and I couldn't just ignore it. Then something strange happened. The voice changed. It was still calling out, still sounding distressed, but the tone had shifted. It almost sounded like it was mimicking someone, like an echo that wasn't quite right. Michelle noticed it too and grabbed my shoulder, her fingernails digging into my skin through my shirt. She whispered that we needed to leave right now, that something was wrong. I was about to agree when the voice called out again, and this time I could make out the words clearly. It was calling my name. Not just my name, but calling it exactly the way Michelle pronounced it, with that slight upward inflection she always used. I looked at Michelle and she looked back at me, her face pale. She hadn't said anything. The voice came again, calling my name from somewhere in the mist, using Michelle's voice. And then another voice joined it, this one using my voice, calling out Michelle's name. We were hearing ourselves out there on the water, our own voices calling to each other from somewhere we couldn't see. I didn't wait to hear anymore. I grabbed the paddle and started moving us back toward where I thought the shore was. But in all our paddling around, I'd gotten disoriented. The mist was still thick in patches, making it hard to see landmarks. Michelle was crying quietly, her hands gripping the sides of the raft so hard her knuckles had turned white. The voices kept calling, sometimes using our voices, sometimes switching to other voices, other tones. At one point, I heard what sounded like a child laughing, high-pitched and echoing across the water. We paddled for what felt like forever, the voices following us through the mist. Sometimes they'd sound close, like they were right next to the raft, and I'd spin around expecting to see someone in the water beside us. But there was never anyone there, just empty water and fog. Michelle started praying under her breath, something I'd never heard her do before. I kept paddling, my arms burning with the effort, desperately searching for the shoreline. Finally, after what must have been 20 minutes but felt like hours, I saw trees emerging from the mist. We'd made it back to shore, though not the same spot we'd launched from. I didn't care. I just wanted to be off that lake. We dragged the raft onto the shore and started hiking back toward the cabin, leaving all our fishing gear behind in the raft. Neither of us spoke during the walk back. What was there to say? We'd both heard it, both experienced the same impossible thing. When we got back to the cabin, Michelle immediately started packing her stuff. She said she wanted to leave, that she didn't feel safe there anymore. I tried to convince her to stay, telling her we could just avoid the lake for the rest of the trip, but she wasn't having it. She said that whatever was out there on the water, it knew our names, it knew our voices, and she didn't want to be anywhere near it. I couldn't really argue with that logic. We packed up the car and left that same afternoon, cutting our week-long trip short by 5 days. The drive home was quiet. Michelle stared out the window for most of it, and I could tell she was still processing what had happened. When we finally got back to our apartment, she said she needed some time to think, that she wanted to stay at her sister's place for a few days. I understood. Hell, I probably would have done the same thing in her position. She left, and I spent the next few days researching Blackwood Lake, trying to find any information about what we'd experienced. That's when I found the old newspaper articles about the drowning in 1957. The family that had died, their names were Daniel and Patricia Morrison, and their daughter was named Emma. The article described how witnesses heard them calling for help as their boat went under, how their voices echoed across the water as searchers tried to find them in the darkness. The article specifically mentioned that the search party kept hearing voices calling out from different directions, making it difficult to locate where the family had actually gone under. Some of the searchers claimed the voices didn't sound quite right, like they were being distorted or mimicked by something. Reading that made my blood run cold. The same thing had happened to us. Those voices on the water, calling out, echoing, mimicking. Was it the Morrison family, still out there somehow, still calling for help after all these years? Or was it something else? Something that had been in that lake long before the Morrisons drowned. Something that had learned to use their voices. I called my Uncle Dean and asked him about the lake's history, specifically about the drowning. He was quiet for a long moment before admitting that, yes, he knew about it, and yes, he'd heard stories from other locals about strange things happening on the water. He said that's why he never kept a boat, why he never went out on the lake himself despite living so close to it. He said the lake took something from the Morrison family, and whatever it took, it still had. He told me I was smart to leave when I did. Michelle and I broke up about a month later. She said it wasn't because of what happened at the lake, that we'd just grown apart. But I knew better. Every time she looked at me, I could see the memory of those voices in her eyes, the fear and confusion of that morning on the water. We couldn't move past it, couldn't pretend it hadn't happened. The lake had taken something from us too, even if it wasn't our lives. I sold the inflatable raft online and haven't been fishing since. My uncle offered to let me use the cabin again this past summer, but I declined. I have no interest in ever going back to Blackwood Lake, no desire to hear those voices again. Sometimes late at night, when everything is quiet, I swear I can still hear them. My name being called in Michelle's voice, her name being called in mine, echoing across dark water that exists only in my memory now. My Uncle Dean died last month. Heart attack, sudden and unexpected. At the funeral, his neighbor from up in Michigan pulled me aside and told me something that's been keeping me up at night. He said that in the weeks before he died, Uncle Dean had started talking about hearing voices at night, coming from the direction of the lake. Voices calling his name, using the voices of his late wife, his parents, people he'd lost over the years. The neighbor said Uncle Dean had become obsessed with the lake, that he'd started walking down to the shore at night, standing at the water's edge like he was listening for something. They found his body at the cabin, but the cause of death was listed as drowning. His lungs were full of lake water. But here's the thing that doesn't make sense. He was found in his bed, fully clothed, with no indication he'd been near the water. The only moisture in the cabin was the lake water in his lungs and soaking his sheets. The police ruled it a heart attack followed by some kind of medical event that caused pulmonary edema. But I know better. The lake called to him, just like it called to me and Michelle. And unlike us, he answered. I'm writing this because I need people to know about Blackwood Lake, about what's out there in the mist. If you ever find yourself near that lake, if you ever hear voices calling to you from the water, don't answer them. Don't try to help. Don't investigate. Just leave as fast as you can and don't ever go back. Because whatever's in that lake, it's patient. It can wait years, decades even, for you to let your guard down. And when you do, it will call to you again, using the voices of everyone you've ever loved, and it won't stop until you answer. My name is Ethan Sawyer, and I'm an engineer from Des Moines, Iowa. I used to believe in renewable energy, in doing the right thing for the planet. Now I'm not so sure there is a right thing, not after what happened at the Prairie Wind Farm. I was hired in February of last year to oversee maintenance at a massive wind farm in western Iowa, 200 turbines spread across 30,000 acres of former farmland. It was supposed to be a straightforward job, monitor performance, coordinate repairs, make sure everything ran smoothly. The pay was good and I believed in the work. Clean energy, reducing carbon emissions, all of that. The turbines had been operational for about 3 years when I started. The locals had mixed feelings about them. Some liked the lease money from having turbines on their property. Others complained about the noise, the shadow flicker, the way they dominated the horizon. But mostly people had gotten used to them. They were just part of the landscape now. My first week was routine. I drove between turbines, checked readings, coordinated with repair crews. The turbines were massive, 350 feet tall, with blades that were each 150 feet long. Standing at the base of one, looking up, was dizzying. They made this constant whooshing sound as the blades cut through the air. A rhythmic thump, thump, thump that you could feel in your chest. The problem started in March. Several farmers called to complain about their livestock. Cows were acting strangely, refusing to graze in certain fields, huddling together in the corners farthest from the turbines, making distressed sounds at all hours. One farmer, a man named Dale Hutchinson, told me his dairy cows had stopped producing milk almost entirely. It's those damn windmills, he said. I'm telling you, they're doing something to my animals. I assured him there was no scientific evidence that wind turbines affected livestock. I'd read the studies. There was no mechanism by which they could cause harm. Dale just shook his head and walked away. But then the birds started dying. Not just a few birds, thousands of them. Every morning we'd find them scattered around the base of the turbines. Mostly raptors at first, hawks, eagles, owls, then smaller birds, then bats. The biologist we hired to assess the situation said it was normal, an unfortunate side effect of the turbine blades. But the numbers seemed wrong to me. Too many, too consistent. And they weren't just hitting the blades. We'd find birds on the ground with no visible injuries, just lying there with their eyes open, dead. Some were arranged in circles around the turbine bases, perfect circles, like something had placed them there deliberately. In April, the turbines started behaving strangely. Turbine 47 stopped generating power even though the wind was strong and steady. When the repair crew went up to inspect it, they found the internal mechanisms had been changed. The gears were worn down in impossible ways, metal twisted and reformed into shapes that made no engineering sense. It was as if something had been deliberately sabotaging the equipment from the inside. Must be a manufacturing defect, the lead technician said. But he looked worried. He'd been working on turbines for 20 years and had never seen anything like it. We replaced the damaged parts, and Turbine 47 came back online. But then Turbine 48 failed the same way. Then 49 and 50, always in sequence, always with the same impossible damage to the internal mechanisms. Then I started hearing the sounds. Late at night, when I was alone at the site office, I'd hear something over the normal whooshing of the turbines. A different sound, higher pitched, almost like singing. It would rise and fall with the wind, but it didn't sound like wind. It sounded deliberate, musical, like the turbines themselves were creating a melody. I mentioned it to one of the other engineers, a woman named Sarah Chen. She gave me a strange look. "You hear it too?" she said quietly. I thought I was going crazy. We started recording the sounds, analyzing the frequencies. What we found didn't make sense. The turbines were creating infrasound, frequencies below the range of human hearing, but in patterns that were too complex, too organized to be random. They were communicating, with each other or with something else. In May, people started getting sick. Families living within a mile of the turbines reported headaches, nausea, insomnia. Some complained of vivid nightmares, always the same dream. They'd see the turbines growing, spreading, multiplying across the entire landscape. They'd see themselves becoming part of the turbines, their bodies twisted into the machinery, still alive, still conscious, but unable to move or scream. The company brought in health experts who found nothing wrong. Nocebo effect, they said. Psychological response to perceived danger. They recommended community outreach, education about the safety of wind turbines. But I knew it was more than that, because I was having the dreams too. June was when everything fell apart. I was doing a routine inspection of Turbine 88, one of the units furthest from the main road. It was early evening, the sun just starting to set. As I approached, I noticed something wrong with the base. The concrete foundation was cracked, and something was growing through the cracks. Roots. Thick, fibrous roots that looked almost like cables, dark and pulsing. They wound up the tower, disappearing into the access hatch. I grabbed my flashlight and followed them inside. The interior of the turbine was completely overgrown. Those root-like structures covered every surface, wrapping around the ladder, the equipment, everything. They pulsed with a faint rhythm, like a heartbeat, and they were warm to the touch. I followed them up, climbing the ladder to the nacelle at the top. The door was open, which it shouldn't have been. Inside, the machinery was gone. Not broken or removed, transformed. The gears and generators had been replaced by something organic, something living. It looked like the inside of a body. Chambers that expanded and contracted, veins that carried something thick and dark, structures that might have been organs. And in the center, connected to everything, was Sarah. She was fused to the machinery, her body partially integrated into whatever this thing was. Her eyes were open, but they weren't seeing. She was breathing, but not like a person breathes, in rhythm with the turbine. With all the turbines, Sarah! I grabbed her arm, tried to pull her free. Her skin was cold, and when I touched her, I felt it. A shock of awareness, of consciousness that wasn't human. It flooded into my mind, showing me things. I saw what the turbines really were. Not machines we'd built, but seeds. Ancient seeds that had been waiting in the earth for the right conditions. Waiting for humans to dig them up, to plant them in perfect rows, to feed them with wind and attention. Waiting to grow. They weren't generating electricity. They were generating something else. A network, a web of consciousness that spread across the entire farm, connecting to the soil, the air, the living things around them, feeding on the energy of everything nearby, transforming it, incorporating it into themselves. Sarah had discovered it first. She'd tried to shut them down, and they'd taken her, made her part of the network, a node. A warning to anyone else who tried to interfere. I ran. I fell down that ladder, scraping my hands, not caring. I ran to my truck and drove away. Didn't stop until I was back in Des Moines. I tried to tell people what I'd seen, but nobody believed me. The company sent investigators who found nothing unusual in Turbine 88. Sarah's disappearance was ruled as her leaving voluntarily. She'd been stressed. They said overworked. But I know she's still there, still part of the network. The wind farm is still operational. In fact, they're expanding it, adding another 100 turbines across 3 counties. The company says it's one of the most efficient wind farms in the country, generating power far beyond projected capacity. I monitor it from afar, tracking the reports. More livestock deaths, more bird deaths, more people complaining of nightmares and illness, more disappearances. 3 workers in the last 6 months, all last seen near the turbines, and the turbines keep spinning, day and night, singing their silent song, spreading their roots deeper into the earth. Last week, I saw the construction plans for a new wind farm in my county, right outside Des Moines. 200 more turbines scheduled to break ground next month. I drove out to the site just to see. The land had already been cleared, prepared, and in the center of the field, I saw something that made my blood run cold. A single turbine, already installed. But it wasn't on the construction timeline. It wasn't in any of the plans. It was just there. Its blades spinning slowly in the breeze, even though it wasn't connected to any power lines. As I watched, a bird flew too close. It didn't hit the blades. It just dropped from the sky, dead, and landed in a perfect circle with dozens of other birds around the base. I got back in my truck and drove home. That night, I had the dream again. The turbines spreading, multiplying, covering the entire state, the entire country, the entire world. And I was part of them. My consciousness stretched across thousands of machines, feeling the wind, tasting the air, watching everything. When I woke up, I had a nosebleed. And on my arm, just above my wrist, I found something I hadn't seen before. A thin line, dark and raised, running under my skin. It pulsed with a faint rhythm, like a root, like a cable. Like I was already connected. I don't know what to do. I can't stop them. Nobody believes me. And every night, the dreams are stronger, more vivid, more real. Sometimes I wake up and I can still feel it. The wind moving through blades that aren't mine. The vast network of consciousness that's growing, spreading, connecting everything. The wind farm called yesterday. They want me back. They said there's an important project they need my expertise on. Critical maintenance, they said. Only you can handle it. I told them no. I told them I'd never go back, but I can feel them calling to me. Through that line on my arm, through the dreams, through something deeper than words. They want me to come home, to join the network, to become what Sarah became. And the terrifying thing? Part of me wants to go. Part of me wants to climb up into one of those turbines and let it take me. Let it transform me into something more than human. Part of me wants to feel the wind forever, to spin and never stop. I'm writing this down in case I don't make it. In case I wake up one morning and drive out to that wind farm and never come back. If you're reading this, if you live near a wind farm, please, pay attention. Watch for the signs. The dead birds in circles. The sick livestock. The dreams. The roots growing where they shouldn't. And whatever you do, don't go inside the turbines. Don't climb up to see what's wrong. Because once they have you, once you're part of the network, you'll never want to leave. I can hear them now, even here in my apartment, 50 miles away. That high-pitched singing, just at the edge of perception. They're calling my name, and I'm afraid that soon, I won't be able to resist anymore. The wind farm is growing, and it's hungry. My name is Jennifer. I'm 32, married, and I have an 8-year-old daughter named Lily. What happened on Halloween night has destroyed my family, and I need to tell someone the truth about the house on Berkeley Lane. Every neighborhood has that one house, the one that gives out full-size candy bars instead of fun size. Kids talk about it at school, plan their routes around it, brag about how many times they can circle back before the homeowner catches on. In our neighborhood, that house belonged to Mr. Garrett. I'd lived on Berkeley Lane for 3 years and never met him. He kept to himself. The house was a large Victorian, well-maintained, with a perfectly manicured lawn. I'd seen him maybe twice, always from a distance. Tall, thin, probably in his 60s, wearing old-fashioned suits even when doing yard work. Last October, Lily came home from school buzzing with excitement. Mom, Aiden said Mr. Garrett gives out full-size Snickers bars. Can we go there for Halloween? Of course, sweetie. We'll make sure it's on our route. My husband Tom thought it was funny. Remember being a kid? That one house was like hitting the jackpot. Halloween fell on a Thursday. We started trick-or-treating at 6:30 p.m. Lily was dressed as a witch, purple dress, pointed hat, the works. Our street was packed with families. The kind of safe, suburban Halloween experience everyone wants for their kids. We hit a dozen houses before reaching Mr. Garrett's place. His house stood out immediately. Every window glowed with warm orange light. Elaborate decorations covered the front yard. Tombstones, skeletons, a fog machine pumping mist across the lawn. A carved pumpkin sat on each step leading to the front door. "Wow," Lily breathed. "It's like a movie." There were 5 other kids on his front walk when we arrived. Mr. Garrett stood in the doorway, wearing a black suit and holding a large wicker basket. He was taller than I'd thought, with pale skin and dark eyes behind wire-rimmed glasses. "Welcome, welcome," he said, his voice soft but carrying. "Happy Halloween," I watched as each child approached. He gave them a full-size candy bar and said something to each one that made them smile. When it was Lily's turn, she practically skipped up the steps. "Trick or treat." Mr. Garrett looked down at her, that strange smile on his face. "What a wonderful witch you are. Would you like to see inside? I have decorations that might interest you." Lily turned to look at me, her eyes pleading. Every parenting instinct I had screamed no. But Tom was standing right there with me. Other parents were around. The door was open. I could see into a well-lit foyer with framed paintings and a chandelier. "Just for a minute," Mr. Garrett said, looking at me now. "I have a Victorian morning room. Quite educational. You're welcome to come in as well." "Please, Mom?" Lily asked. I should have said no. God, I should have said no. "Okay, 1 minute. Tom and I will wait right here." Lily went inside. Mr. Garrett stepped back, leaving the door open. I could see her looking at something on the wall, pointing, asking questions I couldn't hear. Then, maybe 30 seconds later, Mr. Garrett stepped into the doorway. "I'm sorry, she's dropped her candy, just retrieving it from the parlor." He closed the door. I waited. 10 seconds, 20, 30. "Tom," I said, my voice tight. He was already moving toward the door. He knocked. "Lily? Time to go, honey." No answer. He knocked harder. "Mr. Garrett? We need our daughter to come out now." The door opened. Mr. Garrett stood there, looking confused. "I'm sorry? Your daughter? The little girl who just went inside," I said, my heart starting to pound. "The witch. Where is she?" "No one came inside," he said calmly. "I've been handing out candy at the door all evening." "That's impossible," Tom said, his voice rising. "We watched her walk in. You invited her in. Where is my daughter?" Mr. Garrett's expression didn't change. "Sir, I assure you, no children have entered my home. Perhaps she wandered to another house." Tom pushed past him into the foyer. I followed. The house was immaculate. Hardwood floors, antique furniture, that chandelier casting everything in golden light. Tom started calling Lily's name, checking rooms on the first floor. I ran upstairs, throwing open doors. Bedroom, bathroom, office, empty. Mr. Garrett followed us calmly. "I really must insist you leave. You're upsetting my evening." "Where is she?" I screamed at him. "What did you do with my daughter?" "I've done nothing." "I don't know what you're talking about." We called 911. The police arrived within 8 minutes. They searched the house top to bottom. Basement, attic, crawl spaces. Nothing. Lily was gone. They questioned Mr. Garrett for hours. His story never changed. No children had entered his home. He'd been handing out candy at the door all evening. Several neighbors confirmed they'd seen him there, standing in the doorway, never leaving his post. But Tom and I both saw Lily go inside. We saw it. The police expanded the search. The entire neighborhood. Then the surrounding area. Amber Alert, news coverage, search parties. Lily's picture was everywhere. Days passed. Then weeks. No trace of her. Mr. Garrett cooperated fully with the investigation. They found nothing suspicious in his house, his background, his life. He was a retired history professor, widowed, no children, no criminal record. No red flags. I started watching his house. Every day, every night. Sitting in my car, just watching. Tom begged me to stop, but I couldn't. I knew what I'd seen. 2 weeks after Halloween, I noticed something. Every evening at 8 p.m., Mr. Garrett would leave his house and walk to the end of the street, carrying a small bag. He'd be gone for exactly 20 minutes, then return. On the 15th night, I followed him. He walked 6 blocks to an old church, long abandoned. The windows were boarded up, the parking lot cracked and overgrown. He went around to the back, where a basement entrance stood half hidden by bushes. He unlocked it and went inside. I waited 5 minutes, then followed. The door was unlocked. Stone steps led down into darkness. I used my phone's flashlight. The basement was massive, stretching under the entire church. Old pews were stacked against walls, boxes of hymnals, religious statues covered in dust, and in the far corner behind a rotted confessional booth was a door, a new door. Heavy wood with a modern lock. I heard voices beyond it. Children's voices, singing. "Lily?" I whispered. The singing stopped. I grabbed the handle and pulled. Locked. I pounded on it. "Lily! Lily!" Footsteps behind me. I spun around. Mr. Garrett stood at the bottom of the stairs, backlit by the entrance. "You shouldn't be here," he said quietly. "My daughter is behind that door." "Let her out, now," he walked toward me slowly. "Your daughter went somewhere else, somewhere better. They all do." "They? How many children have you taken?" "I don't take them. They choose to stay. Every year, on Halloween, when the veil is thinnest, the door opens. They see what's on the other side, and they choose." "You're insane." "Open the door or I'm calling the police." "Call them." "They won't find anything." "They never do." I called 911. I screamed our location into the phone. Mr. Garrett just stood there, watching me with those dark, empty eyes. The police came. They broke down the door. Behind it was a small room. Empty. Stone walls. Dirt floor. No other exits, no children. "No, Lily. She was here." I sobbed. "I heard her singing. I heard children. The police found nothing. The church basement was empty except for old junk. There was no evidence anyone had been there recently. No forensics. No traces. Nothing. Mr. Garrett was arrested but released 18 hours later. No evidence. No probable cause. Tom and I divorced 3 months later. He couldn't handle it. He needed to believe Lily had been kidnapped by someone, somewhere else, that we'd someday find her. He couldn't accept what I knew to be true. It's been almost a year now. Halloween is in 3 days. Yesterday I received a package. No return address. Inside was Lily's witch hat and a photograph. The photo shows 6 children standing in a room I don't recognize. The walls are covered in symbols I don't understand. The children are holding hands in a circle. They're all wearing their Halloween costumes from last year. Lily is there, in her purple witch dress, smiling. Behind them, barely visible in the shadow, is a tall figure in a black suit. On the back of the photo, in handwriting I recognize as Lily's. "I'm okay, Mommy. It's beautiful here. Don't be sad. We're having the best Halloween ever. Mr. Garrett was right. We all chose to stay. I'm going back to that church tomorrow night. Halloween night. If the veil is thinnest, if the door opens, I'm going through. I don't care what's on the other side. I'm bringing my daughter home, or I'm staying there with her." I'm Rebecca Walsh, and I live in Phoenix, Arizona. I was, until 6 months ago, an avid gardener. My backyard was my pride and joy. Roses, vegetables, citrus trees. People in the neighborhood would stop to admire it. I won the Community Garden Award 4 times. I'll never touch soil again. It started in March. Phoenix had just gone through a severe drought, the worst in recorded history. The city implemented strict water restrictions, and my garden suffered. The grass died first, turning brown and crispy. Then the roses withered. Even my cacti, which should have been fine, started looking unhealthy, their flesh puckering and turning gray. I was devastated. 15 years of work dying in front of me. So when I saw an ad for a new fertilizer called Growth Plus, I didn't think twice. It was marketed as a revolutionary organic formula that would revitalize even the most damaged gardens, while using 70% less water. It seemed like a miracle solution. The stuff arrived in an unmarked brown bag. No label, no ingredient list, just a handwritten note that said, "Mix 1 cup with soil, water sparingly, watch results." The fertilizer itself was dark, almost black, with a consistency like coffee grounds. It smelled strange, earthy but also slightly sweet, like overripe fruit. I mixed it into the soil around my rose bushes first. Within 3 days, I saw results. New shoots appeared, bright green and healthy. The roses bloomed, massive, deep red flowers that were bigger and more beautiful than anything I'd ever grown before. I was thrilled. I used the fertilizer on my vegetables next, then my fruit trees. Everything exploded with growth. My tomato plants grew 6 feet tall in a week. The orange tree, which hadn't produced fruit in 2 years, was suddenly heavy with oranges. The grass came back, thick and lush, and impossibly green despite the drought. Neighbors started commenting on it, asking what my secret was. I should have known something was wrong when the birds stopped coming. My garden used to be full of them. Finches, doves, hummingbirds. But after I used the fertilizer, they disappeared. Completely. Even the insects were gone. No bees, no butterflies, no ants. Nothing. The garden was silent except for the sound of things growing, because I could hear it. At night, when everything was quiet, I'd lie in bed and hear this soft rustling sound coming from the backyard. The plants were growing fast enough that you could actually hear it. A constant whisper of leaves unfurling, stems stretching, roots pushing through soil. In April, I started finding the vines. They appeared first along the back fence. Thin, dark green vines with no flowers or leaves, just smooth stems that grew in twisting spiral patterns. I didn't recognize the species, which was odd because I knew every plant in my garden. I tried to pull them up, but the roots went deep. Really deep. I'd yank and they'd barely budge. Within a week, the vines had covered the entire back fence. Then they started spreading. They crept across the ground, winding between my other plants, climbing the walls of my house. I spent hours every day cutting them back, but they grew faster than I could trim. I'd cut a vine in the morning, and by evening it would be back, twice as thick. The worst part was how they moved. I know plants don't actually move, not in any way you can see, but these did. If I sat very still and watched, I could see them shifting, reaching out like they were searching for something. They'd wrap around other plants, around the legs of my garden furniture, around anything they could find. In May, my neighbor's cat went missing. Mrs. Chen from next door came asking if I'd seen him. A big orange tabby named Rusty. I told her I hadn't. And I hadn't. Not alive anyway. I found him 3 days later, in the back corner of my garden, where the vines were thickest. He was incorporated into them. That's the only way I can describe it. The vines had grown around him, through him, until he was just part of the mass. I could see his fur, his face frozen in a silent scream, but he wasn't rotting. He looked preserved, like the plants were keeping him fresh. I tried to pull him out, but the vines held tight. When I cut them away, they bled. Not sap, blood. Actual red blood that smelled like copper and earth. I called animal control, but by the time they arrived, Rusty was gone. The vines had pulled him deeper, underground, until there was no trace he'd ever been there. "You must have been mistaken," the officer told me. "Probably saw a dead animal from the desert. Coyotes drag prey into weird spots sometimes." But I knew what I'd seen. I stopped going into the garden after that. I let the vines take over, hoping they'd run their course and die off. But they didn't die. They grew stronger. They covered my entire backyard, a writhing mass of green that pulsed and moved with its own rhythm. At night, I could hear them scratching at the back door, trying to find a way inside. I called the company that made the fertilizer. The number was disconnected. I searched online for Growth Plus fertilizer and found nothing. No company, no website, no reviews. It was like it never existed. In June, the vines broke through. I woke up one morning to find thin tendrils had pushed through cracks in my back door frame, snaking across my kitchen floor. They were heading for the sink, for the water. I grabbed a knife and started cutting, but for every vine I severed, 2 more appeared. That's when I noticed something else. The vines weren't just growing randomly. They were forming patterns, geometric shapes, symbols that looked almost like writing, and they were all pointing in one direction. Toward me. I packed a bag and left that same day. I didn't even lock the door. I drove straight to my sister's house in Tucson and told her everything. She thought I was having a breakdown, but she let me stay. The city condemned my house 2 weeks later. Apparently, the entire structure had been compromised by invasive plant growth. They said it was unsafe and would need to be demolished. The demolition crew went in last month. They called me afterward. The foreman sounded shaken. "Ms. Walsh," he said, "we need you to come down to the site. There's something you need to see." I didn't want to go, but I did. When I got there, the house was gone, reduced to rubble. But the garden was untouched. More than untouched. It was thriving. The vines had spread to every house on my block. They covered walls, roofs, cars. And in the center, where my house had been, there was something new. A tree. Massive, maybe 40 feet tall, with bark that was almost black and leaves that were dark red, like blood. It hadn't been there before the demolition. It had grown in less than a day, and at the base of the tree, growing out of the roots, I saw them. Shapes that looked like faces. Human faces. I recognized some of them. Mrs. Chen, the mailman who'd disappeared in April. A jogger I used to see every morning who'd vanished without a trace. They were all there, preserved in the wood, their eyes open, watching. "We don't know what to do with it," the foreman said. "We've tried cutting it down, but the chainsaws won't work. The blades just break. And the tree? It's growing faster. It's already spread to 3 more properties. Animal control found something yesterday. Bones. Human bones. Mixed into the root system. I looked at that tree, at those faces trapped in the wood, and I understood. The fertilizer hadn't been fertilizer at all. It was something else. Something that had been waiting for the right conditions. A drought-stressed garden, desperate soil. A gardener willing to do anything to save her plants. It had used me to wake up, to grow, to spread. The city evacuated 4 blocks. They brought in specialists from the university, from the CDC, from the Department of Agriculture. They've quarantined the entire area. The last I heard, the tree is still growing. It's 50 feet tall now, and the vines have spread to a 1/4-mile radius. They're talking about burning it, but they're afraid of what might happen if they do. I still get letters sometimes. Unsigned, no return address. They contain seeds, black seeds, about the size of a pencil eraser, that smell like that original fertilizer, and a note that always says the same thing: share the growth. I burn them immediately. Every single one. But last week, I noticed something growing in the flower pots outside my sister's apartment. Thin, dark green vines with no flowers or leaves. They found me, and I don't think I can run anymore. Before getting an office job in the city, I was a FedEx driver for 3 years. It was decent money, and I enjoyed it for the most part. It had its moments, though. It was 2012. I'd been out of college for 3 years. I was working 10 to 6 on a Wednesday. It was the dead of winter, so it was dark by like 4:30. I wasn't exactly living in Beverly Hills either. I was living in a small town in South Carolina. I don't want to call it ghetto or sketchy, but it wasn't a very nice area at all. I did deliveries in that same town very often. The housing situation in this town was weird. Some blocks would have rows of houses and trailer homes spaced too far away from each other, while other blocks were just completely desolate. This made for less deliveries altogether because the houses were so spaced, out and far from each other, that it took longer than, say, a regular suburban or urban community deliveries. Were always marked on the GPS so that I could take a more strategic route instead of just driving all over the place. After hours and hours of deliveries, all over a span of at least 4 different small towns, I started heading down one of those streets I'd mentioned just now. Spaced out trailer homes and small houses on one side, forests on the other side. It's a little past 5 p.m., and my shift is winding down with not too many deliveries left. There was one house on this block and the package was to be signed for, meaning I couldn't just leave it on the stoop. I pulled up in front of the house, went to the back of the truck and pulled out one of the biggest and heaviest boxes of the day. There was some kind of small metal pieces bumping around in the box, lots of them. I couldn't even try to take a guess of what could be inside. My job was just to lug the thing to the front door of the trailer home, and that's just what I did. There was no doorbell on this home, so I had to knock. There were no lights on in there, though. I didn't see a car out front, so I was hoping somebody was home. I knocked a few more times, then I saw the curtains to one of the windows move and footsteps come to the door. Then there was a long pause, a suspicious and unnecessarily long pause before the door finally cracked open. Some older woman poked her head out, all wrinkled and pale. And when I said she had a package to sign, she opened the door fully. She seemed jittery as I asked her to sign the device. She did so. It was a sloppy signature, too. She told me I need to help her carry the box into her room. I figured that would be the case. The moment I stepped into the trailer home, I got a huge whiff of some kind of stench. You know how every home has a distinct smell? Whether it be good or bad? Well, this home smelled awful. I don't know what it was. She was leading me to a back section behind the tiny living room space. She took me to a narrow hallway where I struggled to carry the box, and then brought me to a door. She opened the door and told me to maneuver the box into the closet in the back of the room. I asked her to flick on the light. She said the light didn't work. It was next to pitch black in there, the only source of light being the lamp from the living room seeping down the hall into this room. I could see just the slightest amount to navigate the box inside of the room. As I got close to the closet, I saw someone standing in the corner of the closet. I knew for certain it was a person because of the shape of the outline, and there was movement. There was no logical explanation to this. This person was clearly hiding from me, waiting. I left the box where it was and walked past the woman and said, "Have a nice day." She started to scream at me to come back and help her, and she went as far as to call me a piece of shit. I didn't know what this woman and whoever was in that closet were planning on doing, and I didn't want to stick around to find out. I went on with my shift and went home that night, and thus began my job hunt for a newer, better job. This happened during my senior year of high school, back in the spring of 2018. It was a Wednesday afternoon, and I was sitting in my English literature class, 4th period. Right before lunch, our regular teacher, Mrs. Patterson, was out sick that day, so we had a substitute. The guy introduced himself as Mr. Brennan when he walked in that morning. He seemed normal enough at first, maybe in his early 40s, wearing a button-down shirt and khakis, carrying a worn leather briefcase. He had this kind of nervous energy about him, though, like he kept glancing at the door every few minutes. About halfway through the period, he was having us work on some reading assignment when he suddenly stood up from the desk and walked over to the door. He locked it. A few students looked up, confused, but nobody said anything. I figured maybe he just didn't want students from the hallway peeking in or interrupting. Some substitutes were weird about that stuff. But then he walked over to the windows and closed all the blinds. Now, people were starting to whisper. "Mr. Brennan, why are you closing the blinds?" someone asked. He turned around and looked at us with this really serious expression. "Just a precaution," he said quietly. "I heard something on the radio this morning about threats being made against schools in the district. Better safe than sorry." That made everyone go silent. We all just kind of looked at each other nervously. He went back to the desk and sat down, but he kept staring at the door. His leg was bouncing up and down anxiously. The classroom felt tense now. Nobody was really focusing on the assignment anymore. Then, about 10 minutes later, the lockdown alarm went off. It blared through the speakers for a solid 2 minutes before cutting off abruptly. No announcement, no explanation. Several students gasped. A girl near the front started crying immediately. Mr. Brennan stood up fast, almost knocking his chair over. "Everyone, get away from the windows and the door. Now, move to the back corner." We all scrambled to the back of the room, huddling together. My hands were shaking. He turned off the lights and crouched down near the front of the room, staring at the door like he was expecting something. "Stay quiet," he whispered sharply. "Do not make a sound." We sat there in the dark for what felt like forever. I could hear my own breathing. Someone next to me was trembling. Then we heard footsteps in the hallway. Slow, deliberate footsteps. They stopped right outside our door. The door handle jiggled slightly, like someone was testing it. Mr. Brennan didn't move. He just stared at the door, completely frozen. Then came 3 loud knocks. "Hello? Is anyone in there? This is Principal Dawson. I need to check that everyone is safe." It sounded like our principal's voice, but something about it felt off. The tone was too flat, too emotionless. Nobody moved. Nobody answered. Mr. Brennan slowly shook his head at us, signaling us to stay silent. The knocking came again, harder this time. "I need you to open this door right now. It's protocol." Still, Mr. Brennan didn't respond. He just kept staring at the door, his jaw clenched. After a long pause, the footsteps moved on, fading down the hallway. We all let out a collective breath. But then, maybe 5 minutes later, my phone buzzed in my pocket. I pulled it out as quietly as I could. It was an automated alert from the school. "Lockdown in effect. Armed individual in the building. Do not open doors for anyone, even if they claim to be staff. Police en route." My stomach dropped. I looked up at Mr. Brennan. He was still crouched by the door, staring at it intensely. I leaned over and whispered to the girl next to me, showing her my phone. Her eyes went wide, and she passed the message along to the others. Within seconds, everyone in the back corner had seen it. That's when one of the guys in my class, Tyler, spoke up in a loud whisper. "Mr. Brennan, how did you know? How did you know to lock the door and close the blinds before the alarm even went off?" Mr. Brennan turned his head slowly to look at us. His face was hard to read in the dim light. "I told you," he said quietly. "I heard something on the radio," but his voice wavered. And now that I was really looking at him, I noticed he was sweating. A lot. Tyler wasn't letting it go. "The alarm went off like 15 minutes after you locked the door. That doesn't make sense. How did you know? A few other students were nodding now, looking at Mr. Brennan with suspicion. He stood up abruptly. "I was trying to keep you safe," he said, his voice rising slightly. "That's all I've been doing, keeping you safe." "Then why won't you show us your school ID?" Tyler pressed. "Substitutes are supposed to wear them." Mr. Brennan didn't answer. He just stared at Tyler for a long moment. Then, without a word, he walked over to the desk, grabbed his briefcase, and moved toward the door. "Wait, what are you doing?" someone asked, panicking. "I need to check on something," he said flatly, unlocking the door. "No, don't open it," a girl shouted. But he pulled the door open anyway and stepped out into the hallway, closing it behind him. We all just sat there, frozen, staring at the door. Nobody knew what to do. A few minutes later, we heard shouting from somewhere down the hall, deep, authoritative voices yelling commands. It sounded like police, then silence again. Eventually, the lockdown was lifted. Real police officers and school staff went room to room, escorting students out of the building. When they got to our classroom, we explained everything about Mr. Brennan, about how he locked the door before the alarm, about how he left during the lockdown. The officer's face went pale. "There was no substitute assigned to this classroom today," he said. "Mrs. Patterson called in sick this morning, but the school hadn't arranged a replacement yet." My blood ran cold. They later found out that someone had entered the building early that morning posing as a substitute teacher. He had a fake ID badge and had signed in at the front desk. Before anyone realized something was wrong, they believe he was the one who triggered the lockdown, possibly. As a diversion or to create chaos, he was never found. The police searched the building and surrounding area, but he had vanished. To this day, I still don't know what his plan was, or why he spent an entire class period with us, keeping us safe. Maybe he changed his mind. Maybe we were never his target, or maybe, and this is what keeps me up at night, maybe he was waiting for something, and we just got lucky. I work in IT support for an insurance company in Minneapolis. Nothing exciting. I fix computers, reset passwords, update software, that kind of thing. The company occupies floors 12 through 15 of a downtown office building. I'm based on 14, in a cubicle farm with about 60 other people. My name is Tom. I'm 35, single, live with my cat in a studio apartment. I've worked here for 7 years. It's stable, predictable work. I know the building inside and out. Every conference room, every supply closet, every quirk of the elevator system. But I never used the east stairwell. Not until 2 months ago. The building has 2 stairwells, east and west. Most people use the west one because it's closer to the main elevator bank. The east stairwell is at the far end of the building, past the break room and the rarely used conference rooms. I'd walked past it thousands of times but never opened the door. Until August 19th. That day, I'd stayed late to finish imaging some new computers. Around 7 p.m., I needed to run something down to storage on floor 12. The west elevators were being serviced. There was a sign on them. And I didn't feel like waiting for the east elevators. So I decided to take the stairs. 2 flights down, easy. I pushed open the east stairwell door and stepped inside. The first thing I noticed was how quiet it was. The door sealed shut behind me, cutting off all sound from the office. The stairwell was concrete and metal, painted institutional beige, lit by fluorescent lights. Standard stuff, but the silence was absolute. No hum of ventilation, no distant voices, nothing. I started down the stairs. My footsteps echoed strangely, like the space was bigger than it should be. Between the 13th and 14th floors, I passed a landing with a small window. Through it, I could see the city outside, already getting dark. That's when I heard the footsteps above me. Someone else in the stairwell, coming down. The sound was clear, shoes on concrete, steady rhythm, maybe 2 flights up. I kept walking, expecting whoever it was to catch up or call out a greeting. We were probably the only 2 people using these stairs, but the footsteps maintained the same distance. Always 2 flights up, matching my pace exactly. When I sped up, they sped up. When I slowed down, they slowed down. I reached floor 12 and pushed through the door into the hallway, relieved to be out of that oppressive silence. I dropped off the equipment in storage, chatted briefly with the security guard making his rounds, then headed back. I should have taken the elevator, but I told myself I was being ridiculous. It was just a stairwell. Someone else had been walking down, that's all. Coincidence that we'd matched pace. I pushed open the door to the east stairwell and started climbing. Immediately, I heard footsteps below me. 2 flights down, same steady rhythm matching my pace. I stopped. The footsteps stopped. I started again. They started again. Hello? I called out. My voice echoed weirdly, seeming to come from multiple directions. No response. Just footsteps. Always 2 flights below. Never getting closer or farther away. I climbed faster, taking the stairs 2 at a time. The footsteps below me accelerated too, maintaining that exact distance. My heart was pounding now, and not from exertion. Something was very wrong with this stairwell. I burst through the door onto floor 14, breathing hard. The familiar office corridor stretched out before me, fluorescent lights, cubicles, the soft hum of computers. Normal, real. I went back to my desk and tried to shake it off. Old building, weird acoustics, maybe the echo of my own footsteps bouncing around. I'd read about that. How sound can play tricks in enclosed spaces. But the next day, I couldn't stop thinking about it. During lunch, I walked down to the east stairwell and stood outside the door, looking at it. Just a regular door. Gray metal, a small window at eye level showing concrete stairs beyond. I opened it and stepped inside. Immediately, the silence wrapped around me like a blanket. I was on floor 14. I looked up the stairwell, then down. Empty in both directions. The lights stretched away above and below, landing after landing, seemingly forever. I knew this was a 15-floor building. I'd seen it from the outside, but looking up I couldn't see where the stairwell ended. It just kept going, flight after flight, into darkness. I walked up to floor 15, pushed open the door. The top floor was there, just like always. Executive offices, thick carpet, fancy lighting. Normal. I went back into the stairwell and looked up. The stairs continued past floor 15. More flights, more landings, leading up into shadows. That wasn't possible. I climbed past floor 15. The door there was marked 15 in faded paint, but the stairs kept going. I passed a landing marked 16, then 17. The lights started getting dimmer. The paint on the walls was older, peeling in places. 19. The numbers were hand-painted now, crude and uneven. My logical mind was screaming at me to stop, to go back down, but I kept climbing. I had to see where this led. 20. 21. The air was getting colder. My breath started fogging. At floor 22, I stopped. The landing here was different. Instead of a door leading to an office floor, there was just a solid concrete wall. And painted on that wall, in large dripping red letters, were the words, "Turn back." Below it, in smaller writing, "They're waiting below." I stood there, heart hammering, staring at those words. Then I heard it. Footsteps, multiple sets coming up from below. Not matching my pace this time. Running, getting closer, I bolted, ran down the stairs, past the numbered landings that shouldn't exist. 21, 20, 19. The footsteps behind me were getting louder, closer. Multiple people running hard, their breathing ragged and wet. I didn't look back. I just ran, down and down, past 18, 17, 16, until finally I saw the door marked 15. I grabbed the handle and pulled. It was locked. I yanked on it, panic flooding through me. The footsteps were right behind me now, just around the last turn. I could hear whispering, urgent and angry words I couldn't make out. I ran down to 14, grabbed that door. It opened. I fell through into the office corridor and slammed it shut behind me. Through the small window in the door, I could see the stairwell. Empty. Silent. Just concrete and fluorescent lights. But as I watched, a shadow passed across one of the landings above, then another, and another. Multiple figures, moving down toward the floor 14 door. I backed away and returned to my desk. I didn't tell anyone. Who would believe me? But I started researching the building. Found old newspaper articles from 1987. There had been an accident during construction. 3 workers died in the east stairwell. Something about a collapsed scaffold, but the details were vague. The building was completed anyway. Opened in 1988. I also found something else. A post on an obscure forum from 2019. Someone asking if anyone else had experienced spatial anomalies in the east stairwell of the building at my address. The post had no replies. I don't use that stairwell anymore. But here's what bothers me. Last week, the fire alarm went off. A drill, routine. Everyone had to evacuate using the stairs. Elevators shut down during fire alarms. Most people used the west stairwell. But a few people, including my manager, used the east one. My manager came down with a strange look on his face. "Did you use the east stairs?" he asked me. "No," I said. "West side. Why?" He shook his head. "Weird acoustics in there. Could have sworn I heard someone screaming on one of the upper floors. Probably just echoes." 3 days later, my manager didn't show up for work. Or the next day. Or the day after that. His wife reported him missing. The last place anyone saw him was leaving the office building after the fire drill. Police checked the security cameras. They show him entering the east stairwell on floor 14 during the evacuation. They don't show him leaving. They searched the stairwell top to bottom. Found nothing. No trace of him anywhere. But yesterday, I needed something from storage on 12. Without thinking, still distracted by worry about my manager, I pushed open the east stairwell door and started down. Between 13 and 12, I found something on the landing. My manager's ID badge. Just sitting there on the concrete and written on the wall above it in that same dripping red paint. He went up. Below that, "Don't follow." I grabbed the badge and got out, gave it to the police. They asked me why I went into that stairwell when I knew my manager had disappeared there. I didn't have a good answer. But now, every time I walk past that door, I hear footsteps on the other side. Sometimes going up, sometimes coming down. And yesterday, someone taped a piece of paper to the outside of the door. Handwritten, single sentence. "Tom, come find me. I'm on floor 47. Mark is my manager's name. There is no floor 47. The paper is still there. No one else seems to see it. And at night, when the office is empty and I'm working late, I hear my name being called from inside that stairwell. Mark's voice, distant and echoing, begging me to come find him. I haven't opened that door again. But I dream about climbing those stairs. Higher and higher, past floors that don't exist, following his voice into the darkness, and in the dreams, I always reach a door marked 47, and I always open it. And I always see what's waiting on the other side. I just can't remember what it is when I wake up. Only that I'm terrified. And that soon, I won't be able to resist the urge to climb those stairs for real.